10.25 miles, 8 minutes, 17 seconds per mile today. Absolutely loving the weather out along the lakefront. It was supposed to be dark and gloomy and a little bit rainy during my run, but instead it was sunny and just absolutely beautiful out there. So I had a really great time. Sorry there was a lot of extra B-roll footage for today's intro, but I just had so much fun out there and it was so beautiful. But today what I want to talk about is the fact that the training is done for my next marathon coming up in a couple of weeks. Less than 2 weeks, in fact, June 9th. And I'm in the taper now, and I thought that this would be a good time to take a look back at the training I've done and see how that stacks up against my goal time and some of the race predictors that are out there that you can use to kind of predict how fast your next marathon race is going to be. So my goal time for the Tunnel Marathon will be 3 hours and 10 minutes. That is Boston qualifying time for the age 40 to 44-year-old age group. I am not 40 yet. I'll be turning 40 later this year after I run the Tunnel Marathon, but that time will count towards the 40 to 44-year-old age group. At least that's how I understand it. If I'm understanding that wrong, someone please correct me. But because I'll be 40 years old at the time of the running of the 2020 Boston Marathon, that time will count to that age group. So that's what I'm shooting for June 9th. Let's take a look at a couple of different race predictors to see what they say I will do based on previous races and my training. So the first one I'm going to take a look at is by 538. Now I think they do a lot of other statistical models and predictions based on analytics, like a Moneyball kind of thing, but I think mostly they do politics. At least that's what they're known for, and like extrapolating election results from polls and things like that. But here they have a marathon time calculator. So I'm going to go through this and I'm going to look at things in landscape on my phone. I'm recording it so you guys can see it too. Just landscape, so it's a little bit easier for you guys to see and a little bit easier for me to use, because some of these predictors are hard to use when you use them in portrait mode. So it asked me how many miles am I typically running per week. It doesn't ask me what typically means, because the last 4 weeks have been high mileage weeks for me, 70 miles per week. But before that was 60 miles per week, but we'll go with 70 for now, just for the sake of the model. And we'll enter in a race. And it doesn't give me an option for a marathon, which I recently ran the Chicago Marathon. Although I ran the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon as well, but I was pacing my buddy. So the last marathon that I ran was Chicago Marathon at 3:17 and 43 seconds. But that's not an option here. None of these predictors seem to like to use a previous marathon as a predictor of a future marathon for whatever reason. But the last race before that, or the most recent race was after that, which was the Shamrock Shuffle 8K that I ran about a month ago. That's a 5-mile race. It was pretty fast, cool, calm, and flat. And the time on that was 31 minutes and 59 seconds. So let's put in 31 and 59 seconds. And that puts us at a predicted marathon time of 3:15:32. So not all that encouraging. So let's take a look at another model. Let's take a look at the Runner's World model. And this one is similar in that it won't let you use a previous marathon as a predictor, even though it says it does. If you look at here at the recent race, it gives you marathon as an option, but it won't take it. I've tried that before. So we'll do 5 miles for the 8K. Again, we'll do 35 and 59 seconds. And we'll put in the miles per week. You don't have to put in a number for this race predictor, but I think it's more accurate if you do. If we do 70 miles per week and calculate that, it gives me a predicted marathon time of 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 27 seconds, or 7:14 per mile, which is the pace that I'm shooting for, 7 minutes, 14 seconds per mile. So that gets me right underneath the number that I want of 310. And just for what it's worth, I didn't look at these race predictors before I figured out what my mileage was per week. I just thought that if I wanted to have an incremental improvement over 3:17, where I was running 60 miles per week at the peak, I think I got close to, maybe I had one 70-mile week. I thought that to make it to the next level, which was 310, I thought I'd have to increase my mileage. Anyway, if we switch this number down and average the last 8 weeks of training, which is the most of my training block, I had 4 60-mile weeks and 4 70-mile weeks. So if we average that out to 65 miles per week and hit calculate, the predicted marathon time, according to Runner's World, is 3:11 and 6 seconds. Puts me over the time. It's not a BQ time for me. So right there, you could see kind of the importance of weekly mileage. It's not just me making stuff up. In fact, I'm not smart enough to make stuff up in terms of training plans and training strategies for marathons. So I think that's reflected in that kind of wisdom is reflective in there, or at least, if not wisdom, common thought. Let's go to the third one, which is Tanda, which is a Tanda race predictor. This is something that I got turned on to by Floris, another running YouTuber. I'll post a link in the description. And he had someone on who was very familiar with this race model and algorithm. And it basically said that it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to do speed work to run a fast marathon. The only main thing that matters is how many weekly miles you're doing. And so that kind of aligns with my idea that it's about lifetime miles and lifetime endurance for the marathon race, because the marathon race is so different than even a half marathon, where you're relying on not just muscle strength and fast, but you're relying so much more on that slow twitch muscles and your aerobic fitness. So let's go through this. I've already done it before, so you can see some of the data still pre-populated. It's cached somewhere. So I have age 39. Step 2, previous race performance, 8K, 31:59. And you can set it to miles or kilometers, which is nice. I've done 70 weekly miles and at 8:22 per mile. And the where I got that number is I looked at the Nike Run Club app, and for May, it gave me, which was about 4 weeks and change, mostly 70 miles per week. It was like 8:21 was my average. The month before that, April, I had 8:25 per mile average for 60-mile weeks. So I'm kind of using 8:22 as the number. 8:23 is hard for me to get on the slider, so I couldn't get 8:23. As I was listening to Floris's YouTube video, the person that he had on, I forget his name, it escapes me at the moment, I apologize, was saying that the last 8 weeks are important, for at least for this predictor. So using 70 miles, which is again not incorrect, let's go to 65. So let's do 65 at 8:22 per mile. It gives me a prediction of 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 9 seconds. So just barely, also getting me under, although the most generous of all the models. If I increase this mileage to 8:24 for 65 miles per week, that gives me 3:09:32. So very much in line with the Runner's World prediction. And if I move that to 8:25, that gives me 4 seconds to spare at 3 hours, 9 minutes, and 56 seconds. If I move that number down to 64 miles, that's 3 hours, 10, and 8 seconds. So it's a big difference in terms of the 3 hours and 10 number that I'm looking at that this can have. Now, I think that I'm in a good spot. I think the 70 miles per week number that I picked was the right number to pick for me and my goals. And I think the ultimate thing to keep in mind for all of these race predictors, with the exception of Tanda, the other two, is that they look at a prior race, which does take into account some speed and turnover. An 8K performance is probably the result of some speed work, although I didn't have any speed work going into that 8K. But it doesn't ask you like what paces you're running your intervals at, what paces you're running your thresholds at, how fast are you running your recovery runs, how fast are you doing your moderate runs. It just wants to know how many weekly miles you've run. Maybe there's assumptions built into those algorithms that a person that's running 70 miles per week is probably doing some sort of speed work at certain paces. But all that aside, in terms of the numbers input that you put into all of these algorithms, it's only about weekly mileage. With the Tanda, they ask you for the overall average of all your running, recovery runs, if you're doing intervals, what those rest periods are like, if you're counting rest periods, like if you're doing like a walk jog during your recovery. It takes those into account by asking you your weekly mileage and your overall average pace for that time. And so that Tanda predictor, it's much more elaborate. If you go there, you can see like if you want to run all your runs at 9 minutes a mile, how many miles a week do you have to run like a 3-hour marathon? If all your runs are at 9 minutes per mile, it's in the hundreds or so, something like that. Not something that I can do, but just it gives you an idea that the pace that you're running some of these intervals and thresholds are important, but it's weekly miles. It's the lifetime miles that are important, or that just at least validates my previous thinking, makes me feel a little bit good about it going into the marathon. So an interesting thing to kind of play around with. Let me know if you've ever used any of these race predictors and how they've turned out compared to your actual results. I'd love to hear some of the predictions versus the actuals that are in there. So that's all I have for today, everybody. It's going to be a close one, so we'll see how it goes. I have all the other variables in my favor that I can put in my favor. I've got a huge net downhill race. I'm going to be running in some really great racing shoes. I'm not sure which one it's going to be yet, but either way, it's going to have a carbon fiber plate in it. And the temperature should be good. It will be in the Pacific Northwest, so things should be relatively cool, I hope, although they do tend to get heat waves every now and again, so we'll see what the weather's like. But it's going to be what it's going to be. All I can do now is worry a lot about it and just try and get a lot of rest and have a successful taper, although I'm not really sure what that looks like, to be honest. So before I go, I do want to remind you guys about the charity runner for this week. The charity runner for this week is Vasil Ganchev, who ran last weekend the Edinburgh Marathon, and he did it raising money for Macmillan Cancer Support, a very worthwhile cause that I was happy to donate $70 towards. I'll post links in the description in case you want to learn more about what Vasil is raising money for and what Macmillan Cancer Support does. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it to the end of the video, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Yo, what's going on?